Well, that's all, folks, for now, for the Indiana legislature. The end of the session coming just before the Big Ten tournament, as it always seems to. Strangely enough, they were supposed to go until next week, I thought, Abdul, but I guess basketball gets in the way here, or something gets in the way. Maybe they just wanted to get out. Abdul-Hakim, Shabazz, Brian Gaddie, our political insiders, to talk about the end of the session and whether or not we might see another session before the end of the year. Let's talk about this one first of all, and what did get done and what did not get done in the last few days. What did get done, I think, kind of as you predicted, Abdul, tax cuts. And again, as we've discussed before, the governor coming out in favor of more tax cuts than we thought he would, and getting a lot of them done this session.
Lawmakers did pass about $1 billion worth of tax cuts over the next 7 years and some change. Basically, Indiana's income tax rate will go from 3.2% to 2.9%. But what was embedded in there, and this is something that the Senate wanted, were triggers. And so it doesn't immediately go from 3.2 to 2.9, goes like to 3.1, 3.0, that sort of thing, and over the course of 7 years. And also, if state revenue doesn't exceed 2% on an annual basis, the tax cuts stop. Because that's something that the Senate was adamant about, particularly with all the sort of economic uncertainty that still exists right here and right now. So that was actually the tax cuts. Also, they got rid of the utility receipts tax, which you'll feel on your utility bills, but also too, Democrats in the sort of last hour said, hey, you know what? We should suspend the sales tax on gasoline and immediately put money in Hoosiers' pockets. Brian Mischer, who's a Senate Appropriations Chair, said we can't necessarily do that because that gets a little weird, and it puts Indiana in sort of a weird situation, particularly with its roads and bridges and its infrastructure. Those things have to be paid for. But tax cuts were definitely, I would say, the big thing that happened this session.
Brian, Democrats in the legislature, for the most part, went along with those tax cuts, even though some of them griped about it. A lot of them still voted for it.
Well, cutting taxes is politically popular. I mean, let's face it, it's not politically tenable to go out and say, hey, we're for people paying higher taxes or not cutting taxes. So just the politically safe move for us Democrats, obviously considering we're in the super minority, is to go along with the tax cuts. And some of those tax cuts are also going to help businesses too. So overall, we really couldn't stop it anyway. So we were in the super minority. So yeah, we went along with it, and I think it's the Republicans obviously can't use it against us because we voted along with them with the tax cuts.
Abdul, still there's an argument among some, and I'm thinking of our friend Dr. Mike Hicks, the esteemed economist at Ball State, who think this was not a responsible move fiscally. He's making the argument that Indiana's economy overall is not nearly as strong as it would appear to be on the surface.
Yes, I know Mike. Mike's a good guy and a good friend. I personally would have rather seen lawmakers spend some of the extra money on reducing our debt. Particularly that pre-1996 teacher pension liability was able to do a really good job of reducing that. Granted, they did sort of dedicate $2 billion to reduce that number even further, because once that pension debt is gone and pension's fully funded, you can really do some really interesting things to sort of transform Indiana's government. But I see Mike's sort of point, particularly when it comes to our post-secondary education, because you still have a lot of Hoosiers that don't necessarily have that post-secondary degree, whether it's community college or a certificate or a 4-year degree, and that's going to hurt the state in the long run. But unfortunately, you can take a horse to water, but I can't make that horse enroll in a class at Ivy Tech or the University of Indianapolis. So I see Mike's point, but the hard part is we're sort of divided right now. We're sort of two sets of people. There are Hoosiers with post-secondary degrees, post-secondary education, who are doing well, and those who just aren't.
One bill that did not get done, and they tried to insert it into another piece of legislation, but they could not get it through all the way, both the House and Senate. And that was what was originally Senate Bill 17. And this dealt with what critics called, or at least supporters of the bill called, obscene material in public schools, public school libraries in particular, and public libraries as well. They tried to bring back some of this language, Brian, in conference committee. It got through the House, was killed in the Senate, probably for a variety of reasons, but it was language that was fought by Democrats. It was fought by the teachers unions, the Indiana State Teachers Association, all throughout the session, and yet it still almost made its way across the finish line.
Well, what was that famous Supreme Court justice that said, I don't know obscenity, but I define it when I see it. I forget his name. I don't Abdul, no being an attorney, but obscenity is hard to define. So, when someone says this is obscene to me, maybe it's obscene to you, but it's not to someone else. So we don't need teachers' hands being tied by, again, politicians. I know we've talked about this the whole session, General Assembly session this year, but that seems to be the MO of the Republicans. They want to tell teachers what to do, how to teach, and we do not need that. And I'm glad it failed. And we need to allow teachers the autonomy to have and the freedom to teach in the classroom what the students need to know. And that's just my heartfelt opinion as a Democrat who's a strong supporter of teachers.
And by the way, Ray, part of the reason that bill failed was because it basically was Christmas tree legislation was attached with so many other things that really had nothing to do with libraries and children's reading material and obscenity. So part of the reason why the bill failed was because it was Christmas tree legislation. And a lot of senators didn't think it failed what senators call the germaneness rule, that everything in the bill has to be sort of related to each other. The only exception is the budget.
But at the same time, we see that all the time at the end of session, Abdul, with bills being part of others or mishmashed together to get certain things through that may have died in their original form earlier in the session. I mean, since when is that a hard and fast rule in this legislature or any other year?
Well, see, but the thing to keep in mind is even when they sort of take a piece from one piece of legislation and put it in another one, usually there's some type of relation, whether it's public safety, whether it's roads, whether it's children's health. Usually you can sort of play. It's like it's the old game of 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, and so the more degrees you have to go through, the less likely it's going to be considered germane. If you get maybe sort of one or two sort of separations of Kevin Bacon, then that legislation is more likely going to get through. I never thought I'd use Kevin Bacon game on Insiders with RTV6.
We've done a lot of groundbreaking things on Insiders and State House Roundup here. Abdul, prediction, if we can even make this right now, will Republicans bring something like this back? Because this is a conservative topic du jour right now. Next year is not an election year, and it's a budget year for Indiana on top of that. So is a type of issue, a type of bill like this going to have the same type of traction moving forward?
I don't think so. I think some lawmaker will probably introduce it somewhere, but that would not surprise me. Whether it gets traction kind of remains to be seen, because I can see people saying, that's till 2022. We're working on the budget right now, which is 2023.
Brian, Democrats moving forward with whether it's legislation like this or legislation like the former House Bill 1134, dealing with what teachers can and can't say on certain topics in the classroom. What are Democrats, do you think, doing this year in an election year to take advantage of the fact that, unlike some other states, Democrats did succeed along in partnership with others in killing that bill? But how do you take advantage of that issue and push that message moving forward?
I just think we need to be very dedicated as Democrats and just focus on that issue to try to get teachers out to vote, because we know teachers are a strong constituency in this state, and we know they support the Democratic Party, the Indiana Democratic Party. And again, our message is simple. We do not want teachers' hands being tied by politicians. And that is the message of the Indiana Democratic Party. Republican politicians, Indiana Republican politicians want to tell our teachers what to teach in the classroom. Why don't they become teachers if that's what they want to do instead of being politicians? So they need to stay out of the classroom. And I don't want many of them in the General Assembly. I like to vote most of them out as an Indiana Democrat, but they really need to stay out of Hoosier classrooms and do their job, which they really aren't doing that great a job to begin with.
And one thing, Ray, just to piggyback what Brian said, I will give the teachers credit. They were very organized this past session on stopping things like critical race theory and some of the other things that I thought were just sort of solutions looking for problems that didn't necessarily exist here in Indiana. They met with the lawmakers. It was usually like 5 or 6 teachers for each individual lawmaker. And so you get 5 or 6 teachers from your district, you start listening, you start paying attention, like, hey, maybe there is something out there. So I got to give the teachers union, they don't get a whole lot of victories these days in Indiana, but that one I got to give credit where credit is due.
The stronger the Indiana Democratic Party gets, they'll start getting more victories.
Well, I say all that.
Brian Gaddie, our Democratic insider, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, conservative commentator from IndyPolitics.org, our political insiders talking about the end of the session. We'll talk about Ukraine in a second and what some Hoosier elected officials have had to say about the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. But state lawmakers may be back to talk about a completely different topic, and Abdul, it's one that they usually talk about every session, and that's abortion legislation. We didn't see any this past session, nothing major anyway, but that was for a specific reason. They are waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on this case out of Mississippi, where they are trying to ban all abortions essentially after 15 weeks of pregnancy. The expectation is that the Supreme Court is going to rule in favor of that law. Abdul, what do Republicans in the General Assembly have planned when that happens?
First of all, I'm not sure the Supreme Court is going to rule favorably on the Mississippi law. And because you got to keep in mind, no one knows what the court is going to do. Anyone who tells you they do is just nuts and crazy. That's kind of the point I just want to make perfectly clear. Number two, if they do decide to uphold that law, I would expect any lawmakers to come back and immediately do something to maybe pass a similar law. But I warn my Republican friends, if you do that, you got a bunch of women in this state, particularly the suburban Republican women who live in Carmel, Fishers, Zionsville, Avon, Greenwood, Greenfield, who will not be happy with the thought of a bunch of men trying to regulate their reproductive organs. And that could literally sort of change the tide here in the state of Indiana. Also, number two, if Indiana were to do that, then expect a whole bunch of abortion clinics to pop up in Michigan and Illinois.
Brian, are there enough of those suburban women, again, assuming that's the course this takes, if that did happen, are there enough of those suburban women to truly make a difference, who would perhaps vote with Democrats on that issue, but who are in all likelihood not going to vote with Democrats on a lot of other things?
Absolutely, there are. If you look in a lot of other states, that's how President Biden won the presidency over the former president, twice impeached Donald Trump. He did very well. He did very well in suburban areas, like the suburbs of Philadelphia, the suburbs of Atlanta. So we Democrats here in Indiana are going to take that template, that same model, and use it right here in Indiana. And there's no reason why we can't make inroads. And we are beginning to make inroads in Hamilton County and Johnson County. We are beginning to do better in those suburban areas. And to my good friend Abdul's point, if the Republicans push a draconian anti-abortion agenda, which denies women their constitutional reproductive freedoms and rights, they are going to pay a price at the ballot box. And we Democrats are going to make them pay, because women voters will not forgive them for doing it. And we Democrats will remind them. As the old saying goes, remember in November. And we will make sure the women of Indiana remember.
And also, Ray, too, to keep in mind, on the abortion issue is changing all the time, because pretty soon, matter of fact, actually get it now, you can order a pill which prevent conception. So, and how do lawmakers stop that from happening? I mean, if you order a pill from Canada, what do you do? So on that abortion issue, I think Republicans need to tread very carefully, because their base is not necessarily the general population here in Indiana.
Well, there are states, and Missouri is one of them, that are trying to outlaw the shipment of those abortion pills right now.
I think Texas is one of them as well.
Yeah, so that remains to be seen. Another issue that's going to be obviously on the ballot box, whether we want it to or not, in all likelihood, is what's going on in Ukraine as we record this. Of course, the invasion is still underway. Russians are bombing Ukrainian civilians in a number of cities as they inch closer to Ukraine's capital. A lot of damage there, of course. And of course, the collateral damage has to do with oil prices. That's where Americans are feeling it, Hoosiers are feeling it the most, is at the gas pump and the resulting price increases that will inevitably come because of higher fuel costs. Here in Indiana, we're fortunate in that we don't have as expensive gas to say as California, Abdul, but at the same time, we're in this tenuous place where Republicans, it would seem, yes, they want to be on the right side of the Russia-Ukraine issue, but at the same time, they would, I'm sure, like to use high gas prices against Democrats in forthcoming elections.
Well, when a gallon of gasoline costs almost as much as my cup of coffee from Starbucks, that's when you know you're starting to feel the pinch, so to speak here. And you're right. The gas prices are going to be an interesting creature, because we don't know necessarily what they're going to be like come November. And also, please keep in mind too that Russia isn't necessarily the high cause of our gas price, because the U.S. only imports about 8% of oil from Russia, so it's not that much. Then to say that when you do more drilling like the Keystone Pipeline, well, there's some issues with the Keystone Pipeline, because the oil and from that they get from the Keystone Pipeline isn't necessarily used for gasoline. So you got lots of different factors in place here with these sort of inflationary pressures. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because if someone's paying $5 for gasoline, that's money they're not spending somewhere else.
It's true, but I mean, the world market price of oil, regardless of how much oil we get from Russia or Saudi Arabia or any of the OPEC nations, Brian, the price of gas is largely governed by the world market price, which is covered by a number of external forces. And the biggest of which of those right now is what's going on in Ukraine.
Absolutely. President Biden's actually reached out to the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia in particular, try to get them to turn up the spigot, so to speak, to get more oil into the market. So hopefully that can lower the prices. Plus, he's also talked about releasing oil from the strategic petroleum reserve. So President Biden's definitely taking steps in that direction to try to mitigate as much as possible the deleterious effects of high gas prices. We all feel it, of course. We all own cars, so it's not like it's something that's an abstract concept here. Every time we go to the gas pump, we feel it. But just imagine what the people of Ukraine are dealing with every day in their fight for freedom. We as Americans have to stand with anybody in the world that's fighting for freedom. And what Russia's doing in Ukraine, these are just war crimes. I mean, bombing hospitals and bombing schools. We have to stand with them, obviously, to the point where we don't provoke World War III, of course, but we do have to stand with the people of Ukraine. And the Republicans that are standing with us, Democrats, that's great. I'm very happy they're tired of being the GOP or Gaga over Putin instead of the Grand Old Party. Sorry, Lady Gaga, hope she doesn't come after me. But that's what they have to decide. I'm very happy that former Vice President Mike Pence is actually standing up for that old traditional wing of the Republican Party that stood up against the aggressive Russian behavior. I guess he's invoking Ronald Reagan against what Donald Trump, more like the Neville Chamberlain wing of the Republican Party. But it's really great to see there are Republicans that are standing up to what's going on with the Russians in Ukraine. And I'm glad they're standing up with us Democrats. But they've got this dichotomy in their party. So they got to decide, are they going to be the Gaga over Putin party, or are they going to go back to being the Grand Old Party? That's up to them. We'll have to see what they decide to be.
I want to talk to Abdul. I want to talk to Abdul about that in just a second. But Brian, let me do this first. When it comes to gas prices, when it comes to energy, there are some who might say, and there might be even some on the Democratic side who might say that high gas prices are yet another sign that we need to make a shift toward a greener energy policy. And President Biden did have a big time green energy policy that he pushed during his campaign that, let's be honest, essentially seems to be on hold right now. Is there any hypocrisy here when the president is now talking about, well, the countries need to ramp up oil production, when leading up until now, it's been let's shift to renewables. Let's make it easier to have electric cars and get those from one place across the country to another.
Oh my goodness, Elon Musk said we need to start increasing oil production. So we're in an emergency situation here, Ray. So do I support renewable energy? Absolutely. I'm a strong environmentalist. I'm a green Democrat. But at the same time, we are in an emergency situation. I feel like the 1980s are back. We've got Russia doing what they're doing. We've got Biden playing the role of Reagan, and the Republicans, it's up to them as to what they want to be. Do they want to continue with this, like I said, Gaga over Putin position they've been in, or do they want to stand with, I would say, with former Vice President Mike Pence and stand up to the aggression of the Russians? So we're in an emergency situation. We have to do what we have to do in the short term, but long term, we do need to be moving toward renewable energy. Absolutely.
Ray, three things real quick on the gas prices. There's actually certain things you can do right now to mitigate the high cost of gasoline. Number one, don't idle your car. Number two, get all the crap out of the trunk, because the more it's weighted down, the more gas you consume. Keep your tires rotated, clean your air filter, all the things that our parents taught us how to do. Read your manual, keep your car in good shape. That'll actually do you. That'll do more to mitigate the high cost of gasoline in the immediate short run than anything else will. Now, yes, granted, we have like 9,000 permits on federal land that the oil companies aren't using that they can use tomorrow to go ahead and pump more gas, more fossil fuel out of the ground. But I do think this crisis does show that we do need to diversify our energy portfolio. It's wind, solar, natural gas, all of the above.
Absolutely. I was laughing at that, Abdul, because President Obama suggested that years ago about inflating your tires, and he was attacked by the Republicans. So that's just the way they do business in politics.
That's not the first time Abdul has gone AAA here on Insider. It's a true story. Now back to the political aspect of this, Abdul. We mentioned, or Brian mentioned, Mike Pence going to Ukraine. Senator Young has had some strong comments this week, and that potentially sets up, maybe not immediately, because all of a sudden you're not hearing as much from the pro-Russian, for lack of a better term, side of the Republican Party. But inevitably, as we get closer to Election Day, you know that the former president, Mr. Trump, is going to be out there saying things, whether, regardless of who wants him to or not. And inevitably, this is going to creep up, particularly if Russia, Ukraine is still an issue 3, 4, 5 months down the road.
Yeah, and the thing is going to be, it's going to be either probably going to be Zelensky Democrats or Putin Republicans. It's fundamentally what this is boiling down to by the time it's all said and done. I never thought I'd live to see the day that some of my more Republican friends would be sort of backing, Vladimir Putin, a dictator. But then again, we live in weird times. If the war does drag on, I think it's more politically, politically more about Vladimir Putin, because this is Afghanistan. When we helped the Mujahideen rebels, we armed them and they took out the Russians. So I could see the United States sort of funding the Ukrainian resistance, but letting them sort of take the hits, because I do not see NATO intervening in Ukraine right here, right now. But you're right, it is going to be a political issue. I think my Republican friends should tread very carefully, because you don't want to be seen as a Putin Republican. You much rather be on the side of Mr. Zelensky.
Do you think this helps Mike Pence? Because we all know that he has presidential aspirations. The images of him in Ukraine, that's not to be cynical, but that's tailor-made for campaign commercials, Abdul. You and I know that. Does this help Mike Pence in the long term, or is it way too early still to tell what's going to happen along those lines?
I think it helps him right now along the margins. For folks who may have been Republicans who may have been uncertain about Mike Pence, but Donald Trump is still the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and then it's Donald Trump's party right now.
Last question, Brian. From a political standpoint, this was projected to be a tough midterm year for Democrats, certainly in Indiana, at least at the congressional level. There aren't many prospects there, but there was a lot of doubt as to whether Democrats would be able to hold the House and Senate after these midterms. How does the war, and again, may be way too early to ask this question, but you know that a lot of people at your level, at the political level, are thinking about this. How does the war impact the election from a Democratic perspective, and as far as keeping your majority?
Absolutely. Well, as a proud Zelensky Democrat, which I am, I definitely support the people of Ukraine. And, we support the Minutemen, not the Redcoats. Now, if the Republicans want to support the modern day Redcoats, which are the Russians, and not the Minutemen, which are the Ukrainian resistance fighters in the Ukrainian army, that's their problem. They're going to pay a price for that politically. And we Democrats are going to make them pay politically, because in America, we support the underdogs, not the bullies. So I don't understand these Republicans that are out here supporting Putin. I mean, to me, it's just politically stupid. And if they want to do it, fine. We'll just make them pay for it, the ballot box. We're going to do it. No doubt about it.
That may be why so many of them, with again a handful of exceptions, are pretty quiet, at least as we tape this episode of the Insiders. Abdul-Hakim, Shabazz, Brian Gaddie. Always a pleasure, gentlemen. And we don't have State House session anymore, but we will find some other reasons, certainly, to get together in the near future. I appreciate your time.
Hey, there's a primary right around the corner. Who knew?
There is. Cannot wait.